In this week's parsha, we have the death of Yaakov Avinu and the instructions he gives beforehand. In the beginning of the parsha, he calls Yosef, and he says, "If I found favor in your eyes, place your hand under my thigh, the mokum brismila." This is to swear a shvuah. And perform with me a chesed shel emes. Rashi says it's a chesed which is a true chesed because there is no anticipation of repayment. Al nasik b'reini b'Mitzrayim. Don't bury me in Mitzrayim. Rather, v'shochavtiim avasai. I will lie with my fathers. Lying with my fathers is a general euphemism for death. It is not specific to tzaddikim. If you look and say for Malachim, every king that died a natural death, we find the same lashon, vayishkav v'mavaysav. It's just a euphemism for death, for natural death. U'nososani Mitzrayim, you'll carry me from Mitzrayim, u'kfartani b'kvurasav, and you'll bury me in their graves. Vayemar, and Yosef said, "Anochi esek idvorecha." I will do as you say. There's a very interesting medrash that Rabbi Eliezer brings, also the Das Kain Balei Tosfos bring, that when Yosef said, "Anochi esek idvorecha," I will do as you say, he didn't simply mean I will fulfill your instructions. He meant to say that when my time comes, I will do the same thing. I will also ask to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. Very interesting thing, that Yosef was so inspired by the request of his father that Yosef said, I will do the same. But the mashmos is that Yosef felt it was unnecessary to swear. He said, I'll do it. I'll do it. I don't have to swear. Vayomer, and Yaakov said, no, Yishavel, swear to me. Yaakov insisted on a shvuah. But Yishavel, and Yosef swore to Yaakov. And the Ramban asks the question, why was Yaakov so insistent on the shvuah? I mean, if Yosef gave his word, presumably he'd keep his word. So the Ramban says a very interesting answer, that Yaakov Avinu foresaw something that would happen later. That when Yosef sought permission from Paro to leave Mitzrayim to take Yaakov's body to Eretz Yisrael, so he saw that Paro was reluctant. And the only winning argument that Yosef could make was that he was bound by the oath. So Paro said, okay, take your father up to Eretz Yisrael as he made you swear. Rashi points out over there that that was the winning argument, that had he not sworn, Paro would not have let. But since Yosef made an oath, Paro said, okay, you made an oath, I'll let you go. Yaakov foresaw that. And therefore Yaakov said, I understand that you're good to your word. Of course, I don't question or doubt you. But I know that this oath is very important because it's only through this oath you'll get permission from Paro, and that's why Yaakov insisted on the shvuah. So the first set of instructions are the instructions which Yaakov gives to Yosef. And it seems that this is quite a big favor he's asking. He says, if I found favor in your eyes, please swear, do a chesed v'emes, a tremendous kindness. It almost seems that this is far beyond the call of duty. This is not something that Yaakov reasonably could have demanded of Yosef. It's a real favor, a real imposition. It's a chesed v'emes. It's only if he's found favor in Yosef's eyes. Later in the parsha, after Yaakov gives the brachas to the sons, Yaakov gives them final instructions. Vayomer aleim, he says to them, Ani ne'asaf elami, I am going to be gathered unto my people. Now, this is a lashon which the Gemara of Vassar says on Tezayin is specific to tzaddikim. The lashon of ne'asaf elami, to be gathered unto my nation, is specific to tzaddikim. It's a reference to the neshama joining the neshamas of the tzaddikim, ma'olam ha'emes, and therefore this is an expression which only applies to tzaddikim, to be ne'asaf elami. Kivru asiyel avaisai, bury me with my fathers in the Ma'ara, which is Mistei Ephron Achiti, and Yaakov Avinu identifies the place at length. It's Mistei HaMachpelah, which faces Mamre, which is in Eretz Canaan, which Avram purchased from Ephron. That's where Avram is buried, that's where Sarah is buried, that's where Yitzchak is buried, that's where Rivka is buried, that's where I buried Leah. And it says, Vayechal Yaakov l'tzavos esbanov, that Yaakov completed commanding his children, and then Yaakov passed away. So we see several differences. First of all, the first set of instructions were to Yosef as an individual. Here, he gives the instructions to all the children. Secondly, there it seems he's requesting a tremendous favor. Here, he's commanding. Vayechal Yaakov l'tzavos esbanov is considered a command. There's much more detail as to where it is that he's to be buried. How do we understand the two sets of instructions? We talked about this a number of years back. And we pointed out a very interesting thing, that Yaakov really had two funerals. There was a state funeral, and there was a private family funeral. When Yaakov died, after the days of embalming, so Yosef gets permission from Paro to take the body to Eretz Yisrael. So the pasuk says as follows. The pasuk says, "Vayal Yosef likbar asaviv." Yosef went up to bury his father. Vayalu ito, going up with him were called Abdei Paro, all the servants of Paro, Ziknei Beis, of the elders of Paro's house. V'chol Ziknei Eretz Mitzrayim, all the elders of Eretz Mitzrayim. V'chol Beis Yosef, the house of Yosef, Yaakov and his brothers of Beis Aviv. Only the children were left behind. Vayal imo gam rechav gam parashim. Also there were chariots and captains. Vayamachan the kavod ma'od. It was a very, very weighty camp. But it seems that the family was marginalized before, and the Gemara points this out in Masechah Sotah, Daf Yud Gimel, that before there's any mention of the brothers and Yaakov's family, it says that Abdei Paro, the servants of Paro, went, and the elders of the household, and all the elders there at Mitzrayim. And it says they came to a place in Ever HaYarden, Goyren HaOtod. Now I'll just point out a question I don't have an answer to, that if they came to a place in Ever HaYarden, on the east side of the Yarden, that means they took a very roundabout route to come to Eretz Yisrael. Now the Chumash asks this question regarding the Bnei Yisrael, that when the Bnei Yisrael left Mitzrayim, why didn't they take the shortcut into Eretz Yisrael, Derech Eretz Plishtim? So the Torah in Parshas Beshalach makes a point of this. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu had a cheshbon. Peninachem ha'om b'rosam l'chomor. Lest the people have regret when they face immediate war, they'd want to turn back. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu took them around the back route, which meant going around and coming into Eretz Yisrael from the east. But here, where it was just a question of burying Yaakov, why did they take this roundabout route? That they should go from Mitzrayim and somehow find themselves on the east side of the Yarden. They could have just gone along the Mediterranean coast, and they would have been in Eretz Yisrael right away. So that's a question that perhaps we'll leave for another time. But they came to this place, Ever HaYarden, which was called Goyren HaOtod. And it says they conducted there a tremendous hesped, tremendous eulogy, and there was a 7-day period of mourning. When the Canaanim saw this tremendous mourning in Goyren HaOtod, they said, Eivel kaved zel Mitzrayim. This is a very, very heavy mourning for Egypt, for Mitzrayim. And that's why the name of the place was called Ovel Mitzrayim. Goyren HaOtod received a new name, Ovel Mitzrayim, the mourning place of Mitzrayim. Then after that, it says, Vayasu banav lo kein kasher tzivam. Then the sons did as they were commanded. Vayisu also banav aretz Canaan. The sons then carried him to Eretz Canaan, meaning across the Yarden, to the west side of the Yarden, and they buried him in the Maras Machpelah. So there really were two funerals. There was the state funeral, about which it says, Ovel kaved zel Mitzrayim. This was a very heavy mourning for Mitzrayim. Then there was the private burial that was conducted by the family. bringing him from the east side of the Yarden to the west side, and ultimately burying him in the Maras Machpelah. Why did Yaakov's death justify a state funeral? You have to understand, Yaakov was a very important person in Mitzrayim. First of all, he was the father of the Mishnah Melech. That alone would have made him a very important personality in Mitzrayim. But secondly, we know that, according to Chazal, the years of famine ended with Yaakov's arrival. So he, in a sense, was the savior of Mitzrayim. And if you remember from the end of last week's parsha, the matzah of the situation was fairly desperate. Because after 2 years, people had already exhausted all their money, all their livestock, all their land. They had nothing to surrender except themselves, and they surrendered that as well. If they would have had 5 more years of famine, what could they have paid for the food with? So the end of the famine came just at the right time. He was the savior of the nation. So he was a very, very important person. So therefore there was a state funeral. And perhaps this is why Yaakov feared that Yosef would have a hard time getting permission from Paro, as in fact was the case. Because imagine, Lahavdil Elof Alfei Avdolos, imagine a president of the United States would leave instructions that he wants to be buried in Europe.
Kenya.
Now you have to take off the tape. But let's say a president of the United States would leave instructions that he wants to be buried in Europe. So that would be Zion, such a humiliation to the country. I mean, this is the land where he served. He was the president. He should be buried here on American soil. So Yaakov was so important to the Egyptian people that there was a genuine fear Paro wouldn't let. And Yosef therefore had to persuade Paro just on the grounds that he made a shvuah. This really is the issue. Yaakov Avinu is confident once his body can be removed from Mitzrayim, then of course there's no problem. The children would be willing and ready and in fact obligated to complete the process and bring him into Eretz Canaan, to the Maras Machpelah. That's not a question at all. The question is getting him out of Mitzrayim. That's the problem. That is the mission he gives to Yosef alone. The only person that can deal with that is Yosef. The brothers would be powerless on that question. And therefore, when Yaakov speaks to Yosef, he doesn't talk about the specifics of where I should be buried. That's not Yosef's specific job. Yosef's job is to get Yaakov out of Mitzrayim. So he calls Yosef in, and he says, listen, if I found favor in your eyes, I'm asking you a big favor. This is something that cannot be expected. This is something which is very difficult. It's beyond the call of duty. Al nasik b'reini b'Mitzrayim. Don't bury in Mitzrayim. That's what I'm asking you. Arrange, see to it that I not be buried in Mitzrayim. Where should I be buried? When I die, you'll take me to my family burial place. But that's not the issue now. That's not the issue which I am specifically asking you to take care of. I'm asking you to take care of the issue, get me out of Mitzrayim. That is going to be a very difficult thing. Right? The state apparatus is not going to consent. Paro is not going to consent. You're going to have to use diplomacy. You're going to have to use solid arguments. You may have to invoke the fact that I made you take an oath. So that, when Yaakov Avinu asks that of Yosef, he's very, very, he's begging. He says, if I found favor in your eyes, please do for me a chesed v'emes, I'll nasik b'reini b'Mitzrayim, I'll bury you in Mitzrayim. But once that's taken care of, once I'm out of Mitzrayim, now the question is, where will I be buried? So that I can demand. And that Yaakov demands of all his children. And he never mentions the second time around about taking him out of Mitzrayim. When he speaks to all the sons on his deathbed, he says, Ani na'asaf alami, I'm going to be gathered unto my nation, kivros yelavosoi, bury me with my fathers in the Maras Machpelah. And here he defines exactly the location of the Maras Machpelah, the history of the Maras Machpelah, the idea being that how I get out of Mitzrayim, that Yosef will take care of. He says, but now, once I'm out of Mitzrayim, now it becomes the obligation of all the brothers to bring me to the Maras Machpelah. And that already can be demanded. That's already not such a difficult thing to do that Yaakov has to say, oh, if I found favor in your eyes, please, chesed shalamas. This is something which can be very, very much expected. And that accounts for the differences between the two sets of instructions. But I think there's also another important difference between the two sets of instructions. And it relates to the fact that in the instructions that Yaakov gave his sons, right before his death, he adds, Ani ne'asaf elami. I'm going to be gathered unto my nation. And Rav Hirsch says a very, very puzzling thing. Doesn't explain it at length. He says the following. He says that Yaakov was telling the sons, listen, this that I'm asking you to do is not for me, is not for my benefit. Ani ne'asaf elami. My neshama is going to be gathered unto its people. My neshama is going to go join the tzaddikim in the Olam HaEmes. This is not important for me. This is something which you need to do for your benefit. That's what Rav Hirsch says. Very, very cryptic comment. So let me see if we can explain it a little bit. And then we'll understand another very deep difference between the instructions that Yaakov gave Yosef and the instructions that Yaakov gave his other sons. There is a idea which runs in many Sfarim that when a person dies, we tend to think that the neshama departs, goes up to Shemayim, and abandons the guf. But there are many Maimarei Chazal in the Zohar HaKadosh which seem to imply that even after a person's death, the neshama hovers over the guf. And it's a process. The separation of the guf and neshama, if you will, takes place in many steps. There's the moment of the Yetzias HaNeshama, when the neshama departs the body, and then it becomes more distant and more distant and more distant, and finally only after Yud Beis Chodesh is the separation complete. But it's a process. Kvura is part of that process. Through the kvura and the decomposition of the body, the neshama is able to achieve greater separation. The idea being this, that we tend to think a person dies, a person goes to the Olam HaEmes, and they discover the truth. That everything in Olam Hazeh was false, it was a sham, and the only thing which really counts is spirituality, and so on and so forth. There are kama v'kama ramozim in Chazal to an idea that when a person dies, the neshama suffers terribly because it yearns to come back to this world. In fact, among the dinim, among the judgments that are inflicted on the neshama, one of them is called the kaf hakela. Kaf hakela is a slingshot, that the neshama is flung back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And this is one of the dinim, one of the punishments which is inflicted upon the neshama after death. So it's brought down in Svarim, what is the einish of kaf hakela? I'll give you a mashal. If you ever have a teenage child that comes into the house looking for the perfect thing to eat, just the one thing he has a desire for, and he opens every kitchen cabinet and slams it shut looking for whatever it is that he wants. Maybe he doesn't know himself what he wants, and he's looking and looking and going and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, totally dissatisfied. Whatever there is, it's not the one thing that he wants. So that's the einish of kaf hakela, that the neshama goes on to the next world, and all the things that the neshama enjoyed in this world, all the tightness, all the desires, all the passions, they're all missing. They're not there. And the neshama goes looking here and there and back and forth and yearning and wanting, and it feels a sense of dissatisfaction, and it's wandering, it's roaming, it's looking. That's the einish of kaf hakela. This is a consequence of the fact that many people the way they live their lives in this world, their neshamas and their gufim become so entangled that the guf can even corrupt the neshama to a certain extent. The Gemara says in Maseches Brachas that there are various ways of dying. So the Gemara says that the most pleasant death is called neshika, misas neshika. The worst death is called askara. So the Gemara says, what are these compared to? So the Gemara says, misas neshika is kamishcha b'nisa mechalba. It's removing a hair from a glass of milk. Imagine you have a hair floating in a glass of milk, you tug at the hair, it slides right out. That's misas neshika. It says askara is gevava b'nei amr, it's like a shearing of wool stuck in a thorn bush. L'achari nashra, when you try to pull at it, it tugs back. That's the kasha b'chulan. We want to explain the pshat is like this. Those tzaddikim who maintain the integrity of their neshamas, the neshamas are pure. So when it comes time for the neshama to separate from the guf, there's no resistance, because there's no entanglement of the neshama and the guf. Those people were not in that madrega, so in a sense, they've corrupted their neshamas. The neshamas have become accessories to the desires of the guf. So when the neshama finally has to leave, it's very, very difficult. It's being torn away from all the things that it enjoyed. So it's like a shearing a wool stuck in a thorn bush. You pull one way, it tugs back the other way. And therefore, when a person dies, the neshama is not ready to go. Not ready to go. When does it finally get the message that it's time to go? When it's clear that it can't go back. Because when the body is buried and the body is decomposed to the point where there's no place for the neshama to go back to, so then it dawns on the neshama that this is it. It's final. I have to go and join all the other neshamas. And that's one of the benefits of kavura. One of the benefits of kavura is because until the kavura and the decomposition of the body, the neshama doesn't get the message that it's time to go and join the other neshamas in Gan Eden. But the Gemara says that by tzaddikim, the pasuk says asifa, vayigva vayayosef alamov. The Gemara says this only is said by tzaddikim. By tzaddikim, even before the kavura, immediately upon the death, it says vayayosef alamov. They're gathered unto their people, because they maintain the integrity of their neshamas. Their neshamas don't have a desire to remain behind with the guf. As soon as they die, the neshamas are ready to go to Gan Eden and join the tzaddikim in Gan Eden. And that's the oimek of that Gemara of Basra and Design of Beis. That wherever it says asifa, it refers to a tzaddik. The Gemara says, by Yishmael, it says also asifa. It says vayigva vayamas vayasef alamov. So the Gemara says this is a proof to what Chazal say elsewhere that Yishmael did tshuva in the end of his life. But that lashon of asifa, that's a lashon for tzaddikim. Why? Because people that aren't in that madrega of tzaddik, the asifa alamov isn't until after the kavura. It isn't until later. It isn't immediate upon the death. It's a process, because the soul still has an attachment to this world. It wants to go back. But it's not ready to leave and join the spiritual bliss in Gan Eden. It says by the great tzaddikim, whose neshamas are intact and pure, so by them it says vayigva vayasef alamov, there's nasif alamov even before they're buried. And therefore for them the kavur is not as important. But the tayelas that those of us who are not such great tzaddikim have from the kavura is a greater tayelas than the greatest tzaddikim. The greatest tzaddikim don't need it as much because their neshamas part. This is the oimek, I think, of this comment that Rav Hirsch made. Rav Hirsch said that when Yaakov was speaking to his son, he said like this. He says, Ani nesa falami. I'm going to be gathered. My neshama is going to join the nation. What I'm asking you, this is not for me. Other people who ask to be buried, they're asking something personal for themselves. Because they need the burial before their neshamas will go on to the bliss of Gan Eden. Says, I don't need that. Ani nesa falami. I'm going to Gan Eden. My neshama is going to Gan Eden even if you wouldn't bury me. So this is something you have to do. This is something that you need to do. to bury me in the Maras Machpelah. That's what Rav Hirsch writes. Again, what Rav Hirsch writes is like this: that when Yaakov introduced his instructions to his sons with these words, Ani ne'asaf el ami, he was saying that when I ask you to bury me, I am not asking you to do this for me. I'm going on to Gan Eden. I'm going on to my eternal bliss, even without the burial. This is something you have to do. You need to do. I'm just explaining what it first means. In other words, by regular people, the burial is for the te'elos of the person being buried. Right? He can't. His neshama is not going to ascend to Gan Eden until the body decomposes and he gets the message. He can abandon the body. In the case of Yaakov, he was on the darg of those tzaddikim about whom it says that he's nesaf al amol. He's gathered unto his nation even before the kavura. He doesn't need the kavura for himself. He says, this is something you need to do. So what does it mean? So if it's not for him, why do the sons need to do it? The idea is like this. The idea is that the burial place of the patriarchs of the Ummah, this is a focal point for the devotion of the nation. You know, many nations live within a paradigm of progress. Everything is moving forward. Everything is advancing. We turn our backs to the past. It says Klal Yisrael lives with a different paradigm. Klal Yisrael lives with a paradigm that everything we possess is that which we received from Messiah from our forebears. And therefore, the Maras HaMachpelah, the Makom Kvur, the burial place of the Avos and the Imos, I mean, this is not merely a place for nostalgia. This is a place where we connect to our roots, we connect to our heritage, where we acknowledge the fact that what we are is not a function of the progress and achievements that we have attained, but rather it's a function of the Messiah and the legacy which the Avos have given to us. That's why we venerate the makom of the Kavur of the Avos as a shrine. That's the idea of the Maras HaMachpelah. The Yaakov is saying a very poignant thing. He's saying that this is not about me. This is not a regular burial place. A regular burial place is for the te'elos of the person who's buried there. So this is not for me. Ani ne'asaf el ami. My neshama is going to go to Gan Eden without my body being buried. It's not necessary. Totally unnecessary for me. It says, but you have to bury me. You have to take that body and bury it because you have to create a shrine to the legacy of the Avos. That is integral to the very mission of what Klal Yisrael is. And that's why Yaakov here, speaking to his sons, doesn't ask it as a big taiva, as a big favor. If I found favor in your eyes, do a chesed shel emes. It's not just because this is easier. It's not just, as we said before, because once the body's out of Mitzrayim, it's no big deal to take him to Eretz Yisrael. It's more than that. It's because this request of burial in the Maras HaMachpelah is not for Yaakov at all. This is for the Shvatim. I'm asking you to do this for yourselves. And that's why I don't ask it as a kindness. I don't ask it as a favor. This is for your benefit. The initial removal from Mitzrayim really was for Yaakov's benefit, as Chazal say, because he didn't want the bizayon of the earth around him becoming kinim, and he didn't want that Mitzrayim should worship him as an avodah zarah. So those were requests that Yaakov made for his own benefit. Yaakov didn't want the bizayonos. He didn't want the shame of being worshipped as a deity or having lice swarm all over him. So therefore, that he asked to Yosef as a favor. Listen, if I found favor in your eyes, do me a kindness, chesed v'emes, don't bury him in Mitzrayim. But once the body is removed in Mitzrayim, now the question is, so where to bury him? So now you don't have those considerations anymore. Nobody's going to worship him as an avodah zarah. It's only in Mitzrayim he was going to be deified. There's no kinim, only the earth of Mitzrayim became kinim. So there's no personal interest. Now what is it? The kvura, the burial itself, says Yaakov, the burial itself is not for me. I need that stuff on me. I don't need that. That's not for me. I need burial. He says, my neshama is going to go straight to Gan Eden, even if my body wasn't buried. But this is something you need to do. If you need to do it, that's why Yaakov doesn't pose it as a favor. It's not a kindness, not a chesed. So that I'm asking you to do something which you need to do. So that I have to beg you for it. This is for your te'alos. This is for your benefit. Yosef also wants to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. But as we pointed out, the Yosef doesn't exactly ask the same thing as Yaakov asked. Yaakov wanted to be taken to Eretz Yisrael immediately. Yosef says, I will do the same thing. But he doesn't ask the exact same thing. He says that when you are redeemed, Pakaid Yifkaid Elokim Eschem, that God will remember you, God will redeem you, and then you will take my body outside of Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael. Now the question is, why did Yosef make a different request? Why didn't he ask for the exact same thing that Yaakov asked for? The Rashi in Parshas Beshalach says that there was a logistical problem. Yosef could have gotten permission to leave, but Paro would not have given the brothers permission to remove Yosef. But there may be another kavanah here, a deeper kavanah in Yosef's intention. Yosef feared that over the many, many decades of living in Mitzrayim, the connection to Eretz Yisrael would be lost. We begin to take root in Mitzrayim, and we see Mitzrayim as our home. I mean, this is a reality we have to grapple with. Whereas in our time, in our families, our children, now how many of them see Eretz Yisrael as their home, and how many of them see Canada as their home? Because a Yid is meant to understand that he's in Golos. This is not where we should be. This is not our place. But if you're born here, and you're raised here, and you live here, and maybe you've never left here, never traveled anywhere else, so it's pretty hard to persuade you that this isn't your home. Yosef was scared of this. And especially he was scared that maybe people will misya'ish min hagula. Maybe people will despair. And they'll figure, listen, we've been here so long, probably this is the way it's always going to be. We're never going to be redeemed. We're never going to be saved. This is it. We're stuck here in Mitzrayim. So Yosef said something very deep. He said, I will show you my confidence in the redemption. That I will allow my own burial to be delayed until the Geula. If Geula was not a certain thing to Yosef, Yosef wouldn't be willing to make such a deal. I'll wait till you're redeemed and you'll take me up to be buried. As Yosef said, that no, that I'll wait here. Yaakov couldn't do that. For Yaakov to say, listen, I'll wait till the redemption, wouldn't have meant anything to anybody. Because as we said, Yaakov didn't need to be buried. His neshama is going to Gan Eden no matter what. He is one of those tzaddikim about whom it says Yosef Alamov. Yosef wasn't. But Yosef doesn't say that. It says Yaakov was one of those tzaddikim who says Yosef Alamov. So for Yaakov, there's no point in saying that I'm going to delay my own burial to show you the confidence I have in the imminent Geula. For Yaakov, there's no sacrifice. There's no risk. He doesn't need the Kavura. And therefore, delaying the burial isn't going to mean anything. And therefore, Yaakov's consideration was the opposite. That we want to establish this shrine to the memory of the Avos. So, Zviza Makdim in the mitzvahs. But Yosef, who needed the Te'alos of Kavura, he wasn't one of those tzaddikim about whom it says Yosef Alamov. So therefore, for him, to delay his Kavura was an expression of tremendous confidence in the coming of the Geula. Because otherwise he'd be foolhardy to say, I will delay my own burial until the Geula comes. But it's more than that. As we know from the halacha is that when a person's loved one is left unburied, The halacha is he's patur from Kriya Shema, he's patur from Tefillin, he's patur from Kol HaMitzvahs L'Ksuvas B'Torah. When a person is an onein, a person is not period to the death and burial, there's no chiyuv mitzvah. Why? Because it's called an Isaac mitzvah. He's engaged in the mitzvah of burying the dead. There's an urgency, and that urgency precludes the possibility of engaging in any other mitzvah. This has to be done. The idea of Yosef remaining unburied creates a whole way of seeing things that we can't rest. There's unfinished business. Something has to be done. It says we're in that situation of animus where the person has died but he hasn't been buried. There's this constant sense of urgency, of need to address the problem. That's exactly what Yosef wanted to have. He didn't want there should be complacency. He didn't want people should be at rest. People should be relaxed. People should be at ease in Mitzrayim. That if they're going to be in Mitzrayim, there has to be a constant pressure and urgency to leave and go and handle and take care of what has to be taken care of. That was the kavanah of Yosef. Yosef, even in his death, is laying the groundwork for the successful living through the experience of Mitzrayim. That the Jews should not become shakua, should not become sunk in Mitzrayim, but should always be aware that there is a place from which they come and a place to which they are going, and there's business that's left unfinished, and they can never give up their hopes and yearnings to return to Eretz Yisrael. That's what Yosef wanted to accomplish by strategically delaying his Kavura until after Pakad Yifkod, until after the Gula from Mitzrayim. Now today was Asar B'Teves, and Asar B'Teves always falls out this time of the year. I don't know if it always falls out in the week of Parshas Vayechi. Maybe sometimes it falls out the week before, but always about this time. And I think that if we reflect a little bit on the idea of the Arba Taniyos B'Chlal, of the 4 Taniyos which Chazal were geyser for the Churban Beis HaMikdash, we'll see that the Arba Taniyos relate to this theme of Yosef and his burial. You know, in Megillas Esther, it says that Esther was massacring the days of Purim, and the Jews accepted it, just as they accepted Divrei Atzoymas V'Zakosam, just as they accepted the fasts. So what does that mean? They accepted Purim just like they accepted the fasts. So the Ram brings a pshat, Ram and Maseches Tainus brings a pshat, that Divrei Atzoymas refers to the Arba Taniyos. And the meaning of the pasuk is that they accepted the Takana of Purim just like they accepted the Takana of Arba Taniyos. The Ram dismisses this pshat because he says that Tzoymos V'Zakosam, that Tzoymos and their prayers cannot be a reference to the Dalatanios. He says the Dalatanios are not days of prayer. They're not days of Zo'aka. They're days of Shmona. They are days of desolation, of silence, of lamentation, of mourning. They are not days of Zo'aka, of crying out in prayer. The idea is this, that we know there are Taniyos, which Chachamim, the Bati Din, are geyser because of some crisis. If you remember Maseches Tainus, you discover when there's no rain, there's a drought, so the Chazal are mistaken the Tainus. The purpose of that Tainus is Zo'aka, to cry out in prayer to the Rebbeinu Shalom when she sends the rain. Says the Arba Taniyos, says the Ran, are not Taniyos of Zo'aka. These are Taniyos of Shemon. These are Taniyos of desolation, of silence, of mourning, of lamentation. In our observance, it almost seems that only Tisha B'Av has that character. The other Taniyos aren't. But really, the Ran lumps them all together. He says, really, all the Arba Taniyos are exactly that. The idea of mourning, the idea of feeling a sense of loss. He says, why is this so important? Why is it so important to feel a sense of loss? I once heard from Rosh Yeshiva explained that every Yontif teaches something, brings out something in the nature of Klal Yisrael, which it desperately needs for its ongoing survival, its continued existence. Says the Yom Tovim Daraisa, Shabbos, of course, and Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuos. These Yom Tovim bring out ideas which would be necessary for Klal Yisrael under optimal conditions. Even if we'd be in Eretz Yisrael with the Beis Hamikdash, we would very much need Shabbos and Yom Tov. Each of the Yom Tovim in its own way teaches something, inspires something, which is necessary for the existence of Klal Yisrael. The Yom Tovim D'Rabbanan, apparently, bring out lessons and inspirations which are only necessary because of Churban and Golus. Meaning, if we'd be living in Eretz Yisrael with the Beis Hamikdash under the optimal conditions, we wouldn't need a Purim, we wouldn't need a Chanukah. But because of changed circumstances, we needed the lessons that these Yom Tovim teach, and that's why the Chazal were masaking them. So, for example, Purim, we know, takes place in the time of Hester Panim, a time of divine concealment. When the first Beis Hamikdash stood, there were Nisim Geluyim, revealed miracles. It was a time of Gilui Panim. It was a time that we lived in the divine presence. We didn't need a special Yom Tov to teach us how to see Hashem mitoich Hester, within concealment. But of course, with the Churban Bayis Rish, that all ended. The period of the Bayis Sheni was a time of Hester Panim, of concealment. The Gemara says in Yuma, one of the 5 things that was missing in the Bayis Sheni was Shechina. No longer had the open miracles we had. So we were living in a time of Hester Panim. A time of Hester Panim, you need to learn how to see the Yad Hashem. How do you see Hashem's hand in times of concealment? That's what Purim teaches us. Right? Purim took place in a time of Hester Panim, and yet everyone saw that the miracle of Purim was executed by the Ribono Shel Olam. Chanukah is also necessary in the time of Hester Panim. Why is that? Because what Chanukah teaches us is the willingness, the readiness, up to the point of Mesiras Nefesh, not to be assimilated, not to become Misyavnim. Says, why do we need that only in times of Hester Panim? So I'll give you a mashal ma'adav. Nowadays, this time of year, there are many secular Jews who grapple with the question of whether they should have Christmas trees. The Jewish families, they feel left out. Everyone is celebrating lights, Santa Claus, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and everything. And Nebuch we don't have. The truth is, you have to be sympathetic. If your Jewishness has no Shabbos, and there's no Rosh Hashanah, and no Yom Kippur, and no Sukkot, and no Simchas Torah, and no Chanukah, and no Purim, and no Pesach, and no Shavuos, and no nothing, then of course you're in dire straits. I understand why you would want to replace it with something false. So if you have a rich Jewish existence, then why would you want to give it up? For what? For a tree? For, again, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? I mean, you have to be out of your mind. This is the problem. When we don't have what we're meant to have, this is when the offerings of the foreign become more attractive. So, with the losses that we experienced after the Churban Bayis Rishon, no longer did we have Nevuah, no longer did we have Gilui Panim. So the ideology and the lifestyle of the Greeks became more attractive. So to be willing to be meiser nefesh, to resist that urge to be assimilated, that's what Chanukah inspires us to do. We wouldn't have needed a Chanukah under optimal circumstances, but because of changed circumstances, we need a Chanukah. Now the question is this. The question is, what do the Arbatanias teach us? So the Arbatanias teach us something very, very important, which is the idea that the status quo cannot be allowed to become the new normal. There's a tendency to be satisfied with what we have. We get used to it. This is the way things are. Let's make the most of it. and let's be satisfied. So we've been living without a Beis Hamikdash, without Karbanos, without Eretz Yisrael, without the Sanhedrin, without Nevuah. It's good. It's good. Baruch Hashem, we have what we have. So that's a tragedy. when we forget that our current matzav is a b'diavad shiva b'diavad. It's not the way things are supposed to be. And we have to yearn and hope for restoration. That's a difficult thing to maintain. That's the idea of Arbatanias. Arbatanias are 4 days a year, which the Chazal said we should, as the Ram says, the days of Shmoma, days of desolation, days that we look back with a sense of loss, a sense of mourning, that we understand that the status quo is not the way things should be. We're missing something. And this affects us in so many ways. And I pointed out over the last few days that L'moshel, you go Friday night to the Kaisel. Nowadays, if you have the privilege of being in Eretz Yisrael, you go to the Kaisel. Thousands of people come, they're singing, they're dancing, it's Freilach. And the Kaisel, such a machai to go to the Kaisel. But that's not really the attitude we should have when we go to the Kaisel. The Kaisel is the remnant of the Beis Hamikdash. When we go to the Kaisel, we're supposed to tear kriya. Because we reflect not on what we have, but what we don't have, what we're missing, the loss. The Derech Drush, perhaps we can understand the Gemara. It brings out this point. The Gemara of Kama, and Daf Nun Tes. Eliezer Zeira, Eliezer the small, Havasai Mesami Uchmi. He was wearing black shoes. The Kai B'Shukik Narda, and he was standing in the marketplace of Narda. This was at a time that the style was not to wear black shoes. Ashkechu, the men of the Reish Galusa found him. And they said to him, why are you wearing such unusual shoes? Black shoes. So he said to them, I'm mourning for Yerushalayim. So wear black shoes. So they said to him, you're so chashuv, you're so important, you're so dignified, that it's appropriate for you to mourn for Yerushalayim. So Sabra Yuarahu, they thought that he was putting on airs. They took him and they put him in jail. There's a man in such a Jewish community that gaiva was a punishable offense. You could be thrown in jail for gaiva. Imagine, it's hard to imagine such a thing. So he wanted to get himself out of jail. So Amrulu, so he said, Gavra Rabbana, I'm a great man. I'm a big Talmud Chacham. It's not gaiva for me. So Amrulay, so they said to him, No Yadin, how do we know? Prove it. You say you're a big Talmud Chacham, prove it. So Amrulu, he said to him like this. So I'll tell you what. Either you ask me a shayla, or I'll ask you a shayla, and then we'll see. So Amrulay, so they said to him, you ask a shayla. So Amrulu, he said like this. Hi man, the cuts kufra. If a man cuts down the budding dates of his neighbor's tree, so what does he pay? Now, they don't have too much value. They're not edible yet. No one would pay money for it. So what does he pay? So Amrulay, they said, Mishalim Kufra, Luchari pays the market value of budding dates. So we asked back, but they're going to grow into dates. They're going to grow into full-size dates. So Amrulay said back, you're right, Mishalim to make tamri. You should pay for the full price of dates. Amrulay, she said back to them, V'holav tamri shalkum but he didn't steal dates. He only stole budding dates. So it's not fair to make him pay the extra money. So Amrulay, so they said to him, so what do you say? So he gave a system of assessment. In other words, you assess the value of the tree without the buds and with the buds, and the difference is the value of the buds, and that takes into account the anticipated future growth. That's what he answered. So they said, how do you know that's the din? He says, go ask Shmuel. On his bezdin, they asked him, and he was correct, and they released him from prison. That's what the Gemara says. So the question is this. The question is, okay, he wants to prove he's a Talmud Chacham, and it's appropriate for him to mourn for the Churban. But of all the questions he could have asked them to demonstrate as being a Talmud Chacham, he had to ask this one question. If you pick dates that are budding, how much do you pay? Like, what's the connection? Rabbi Eliezer Breitowitz in the Yaros Dvash asked the question that says, "Alon pshat al derech hadrush." But it seems to me that the answer is very, very pashut. The idea of mourning over the Churban is not like any other type of aveilus. Every other type of aveilus is we have a sense of loss, but it's a loss for something that will never come back. If a person mourns his parents are not coming back. And that's why there are halachas that up to Yud Beis Chaydesh you're misabel, beyond Yud Beis Chaydesh there's no more aveilus. You have to face the reality. Nothing is going to change. The aveilus of Yerushalayim is different. The reason we're misabel is not just because we have a sense of nostalgia for the past. It's because we're yearning for restoration. We don't want to lose our connection to the past. We understand that the status quo, the way things are, is not the way it's meant to be. There is a future. There is something that can develop. There is something that can grow. And that's why we lament the past. So he wanted to illustrate this point. So he said you have buds, you have little buds on a tree. And someone takes them. So what did he really take? So they said, they took buds. They took buds. He says, no, they didn't take buds. They took potential dates. Because those buds can grow into dates. That's exactly the point. The point is that a person has to not live in the present and say, this is the reality, this is the way things are. He has to be able to see that there's a future, there's a potential. That's why we're misabel. We're misabel on Yerushalayim. We don't put it behind us because we want to understand that what once was is what can be. If we only want it, if we only yearn for it. And therefore, we have to recall the past. We have to recount the past in order to express our yearning for the future. Well, I just want to point out an interesting thing. That is, Eliezer Zira mentioned anywhere else in the Shas. Is there any other place in the Shas where he's mentioned? No, there's no other place in the Shas he's mentioned. But he is mentioned in a Taisvus. A Taisvus in Shabbos, Daf Yud Beis, brings a Medrash Rabbah in Chumash Bereishis, which quotes a Gemara. The Gemara that the Medrash quotes is really a Gemara in Masechah Shabbos 100 blot later. Famous Gemara. The Gemara says that Rishonim Kimalachim, if the earlier generations were like angels, so Anu K'bnei Adam, we're like people. And the Rishonim are K'bnei Adam, if the Rishonim were like Bnei Adam, Anu K'chamorim, we're like donkeys. In the Gemara, it's quoted in other people's name, but Taisvus in Shabbos brings a Medrash Rabbah that quotes this teaching in Eliezer Zira's name. It's the exact same idea. That Eliezer Zira lived with a sense that we can't get used to the status quo. He says we have to understand that there's a glorious past. We have to look at the past, but of course the purpose of looking at the past is only because we yearn that it should be that way in the future. This is really the connection to Yosef. Because Yosef understood that it's very easy in Mitzrayim to become accustomed to the status quo. To begin to think, this is the way things are, this is how it's meant to be, we were born here after all. It's beautiful, it's perfect. Says Yosef wanted to create an attachment to Eretz Yisrael that people should understand that this is not the way it should be. We came from a glorious place. We came from Eretz Yisrael. We have a connection there. We want to go back there. That's what Yosef wanted to create. That's what the Arba Taniyas are meant to create. The Arba Taniyas are meant to create the same awareness. Right? That the status quo, the way things are now is not the way things should be. We come from a glorious place. We come from a matzav of Gili Panim, we come from Eretz Yisrael, we come from a Beis HaMikdash, there was Nebuah, all that there was, all that was glorious, that we don't have today. And we recall it not because we are simply nostalgic for the past, because we yearn to return to it, and we are confident that the time will come that Mashiach will bring us to it in the future. That's what the Arbatanias are. The Arbatanias are absolutely essential for our survival in Golos. And in the sense of the exact opposite of Chanukah and Purim. Chanukah and Purim give us the ability to cope with the status quo. The Arbatanias give us the sense of dissatisfaction with the status quo. A Jew has to function on both levels. He has to cope with the status quo. He can't allow himself to fall into the deep despair and just give up. What's the use? Things aren't as they should be, so we might as well throw up our hands in despair. He says, no, a Jew has to cope with the status quo. This is the massive, this is where we are, we have to deal with it. So what gives us the ability to deal with Golos, with Churban, with Hester Panim? That's Chanukah and Purim. But on the other hand, that creates the danger that maybe we'll become so complacent and say, listen, this is the way it should be. This is the ideal. This is the best it could be. That's what Arbatanias are for. Arbatanias are to remind us that as good as the status quo is, this is not the way it should be. This is not the way it was meant to be. What was meant to be is what we once had. That the avoid of Klal Yisrael should be like it once was, once upon a time.